Welcome. This is Sabrina Monarch bringing you the astrology forecast for July 1st to July 7th. And we have a full moon in Capricorn, which is an eclipse, and Saturn is retrograde and also re-enters Capricorn. So it's a Capricorn heavy week. And this is an archetype that is pretty serious. And it's also an archetype of facilitation and boundaries and excellence. So I noticed that when things are in a Capricorn tone, or it's a Capricorn moon, or maybe the moon is an aspect to Saturn, whatever it is, when I'm in a field that I am noticing has some Capricorn energy to it, when I'm in Capricorn moments, I notice that I really thrive by doing what feels like the right thing, focusing on doing a good job, and feeling self-esteem come through by seeing my efforts reflected back to me in my environment. So this could be as simple as deciding that you want to have a kind of impact. So before you have a conversation, deciding what kind of energy you want to create in that conversation. When you wake up in the morning, deciding what kind of day you want to have, and applying your discipline and your will towards creating a particular experience. When it comes to developing a moral compass or a moral ethic, I'm just speaking to a broad audience, so I don't know where you are with that. But when we're in a state of mind where we want to live at our highest or be ethical all of the time, then we have these different moments in life where we have maybe some moral decisions to make, or there's a growth edge when we decide that we want to live our best selves. And this can be a really beautiful way to engage Capricorn. So it's not just a bummer, like I'm going to share a quote later in this forecast about this quality of like doing the right thing or living ethically doesn't take the fun out of life. It actually creates more value. So the quality of this particular forecast is a little bit serious in some sense because we're talking about Capricorn, but I really want to start out with kind of prefacing it with that. And let me share my slides with you. And while I'm doing that, thank you for being here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So thanks for being here, and please like this video and subscribe and hit the notification bell. And I would really love to hear your comments about what resonates with you from this video, what your takeaways are, and I will get back to you. I love to hear from you here. So full moon eclipse in Capricorn, astrology of July 1st to July 7th. The moon grows into its fullness in Capricorn this week, so we have a building Capricorn energy, while Saturn retrograde also re-enters Capricorn. It's a good week to engage our relationship with responsibility, productivity, authority, and ethics, all of which many of us have complex relationships to. Even just authority, right? Like, what's your relationship with authority? And that's really interesting with the Capricorn archetype, how deeply conditioned these themes are. Like, we have examples of how people have wielded authority that determine how we feel about authority. So if you haven't had the best examples of authority in your life, often that can create a negative relationship with that archetypal quality. So it is also important within Capricorn, I think, and just speaking generally here about authority, to have really good role models of qualities that you find beautiful or that you want to aspire to. And authority isn't just about bearing over others, it's also being in command of oneself. Possessing authority is a quality that doesn't always come off as tyrannical. Sometimes it's just someone who really gets it done in their life, right? So Capricorn relates to doing things which may not be immediately pleasurable, but which have consequences that we appreciate. Sorry, just fixing my setup here. That's better. So doing things which may not be immediately pleasurable, but which have consequences that we appreciate. If we are new to building a life-enhancing habit, it can be a struggle at first. And once we become more accustomed to it or conditioned, it's easier to maintain. So these are like practices. Maybe it's a fitness thing, like working out isn't something that you like doing at first, but then your body grows to actually crave it. Or maybe it's a writing practice where you sit down and do morning pages every day. And, or maybe it's a dream journaling practice. And when you're really groggy, when you first wake up, you don't want to write, but you kind of make yourself do it. And over time, it gets to be easier. Whatever it is, these things that you're building into your life, there's always a startup cost. Like starting a business, there's a startup energy that it takes. And Capricorn is cardinal earth. So cardinal is the beginning of a season, and Capricorn is a earth element. So I like to think of like rolling a boulder up a hill, Sisyphus for Capricorn, complex metaphor here, but thinking about that quality of trying to get something going, and it's like hard to kind of get it to start, but once it's in motion, it's really formidable. I know that's not how the Sisyphus myth goes, so forgive me for that. Anyway, here's maybe a better metaphor, or just a different one. An image comes to mind of a parent trying to get their child to put on their shoes, and the kid's just not having it. Whether in this image the parent is really kind and gentle, or they're super frustrated or angry at this point, it could really go either way. There's just this quality of kicking and screaming in relationship to doing basic life things. And we each have our threshold, or the thing that life itself is asking of us in place of putting on our shoes. So whatever it is that we kick and scream about. And we're having this internal fit about it. And we're both parent and child in this metaphor, and somehow they're being asked to harmonize. And this is something that I'm thinking of for the week because it is Cancer season, so our emotional reality is highlighted, and a full moon is always the sun and moon in opposite signs. So the full moon is highlighting the Cancer-Capricorn axis, which is really an axis of care and self-parenting and emotional intelligence and living a life of emotional intelligence. So often throughout the day, we may have these moments where we're internally kicking and screaming. And are we just suppressing that part of ourselves to like get on and do what we have to do? Or do we stay kicking and screaming and don't get anything done? Or do we have this conversation and negotiate and ask ourselves what we need and be present with ourselves while we're having emotions? Because I guarantee we're emotional beings, we're emotional creatures. So in addition to that inner dynamic, a potential tone of the week is grounding into a deeper layer of self-empowerment and communal generosity that comes from caring, both in the empathic sense and in concrete actions. So empathic, emotional caring, and acts of service. Sometimes what we see missing from the world around us is what we have inherently to contribute and give to the world. It's really unfortunate that so many of us have received the narrative that nature is a place of ruthless survival, and that beings have to compete for resources and compete with each other to survive. It is totally possible to look at reality through this framework. We've been taught it, it's in the collective psyche. But this kind of framework, when held as an absolute, completely glosses over the complexity of interdependence, collaboration, and synergy. These themes which can also be found in nature, and we are also nature. We could analyze what any various being provides to its environment and how this act of providing generates abundance and well-being for countless relations in the living system. So when we give of ourselves, what we have to offer, we bring abundance and generate creativity in the universe. There's a really common reticence around providing for the fear of not having enough or running out, of being taken advantage of growing weary and drained by it, etc. The act of providing and giving to others is not without its complexities and arts, such as when overgiving has occurred, or there is not enough trust and respect present for the giving to occur. Capricorn is about boundaries after all. So I'm talking about providing because this is a very Capricorn theme. Capricorn is kind of the space holder or facilitator quality. So on the other hand, the further that one recedes from giving of themselves and learning the art of doing so as it applies uniquely to them. So skillfulness does not just happen overnight when it comes to learning how to be in service or how to provide our gifts to the world. There's definitely an arc and a learning curve and a journey that comes with that. Capricorn is about time and maturation as well. But as we are reticent and we recede from giving of ourselves, we can actually become disconnected from the ecosystem of human consciousness and non-human consciousness and just the whole world, basically, and disconnect from this ecosystem as a sense of there being mutual providing because we've opted out. And this is not to suggest that anyone steps so far outside of themselves as to lose themselves. Capricorn relates as well to stillness, rest, and in this deep stillness, awareness percolates through the mind and body, and this can only happen from pause. So often when we're really tired, or we've just been working hard or doing something hard, to keep going at some point might be damaging, and we do need this rest or break, and in that we gain perspective that comes from that pause. And these insights can then inform how we live our lives. This is something that happens when we're depressed too. Many of us are taught that depression is just this bad thing. Sometimes depression, it's deep rest, depressed. It's a time to assess and look back and think and kind of feel the weight of our own identity up until this point. So we're not disconnected from nature. And if we sideline ourselves so that other people and other forces, quote, do the job, what we see needs to be done in the world, we have removed ourselves from a living system at that point. And there is no need to aggressively or reactively do things, but rather a deep, still, interior opening that I invite you into, to consider what your soul wants to give and to provide to the world, and what kind of mutual flourishing that this could create in a collaborative and abundant cosmos. So I'm going to get more into the detail of the transits of the week after a few announcements. The first, at the time of recording this is the progress of the Kickstarter. I am running this Kickstarter to fund a year ahead of these forecasts and also podcast episodes for Magic of the Spheres, which is my podcast. June of this year marked the beginning of the 6th year of content creation. I've been producing weekly content for 5 years now. And to crowdfund the year ahead of this free content creation, I am asking for your support. And I'm offering a variety of rewards on this Kickstarter page, from astrology downloadables to, and like I'm just excited about them. Like one of them is an aspects to Pluto audio, and I'll be detailing the natal Pluto placements by aspect, going through like what's a moon Pluto aspect, what's sun Pluto, what's Venus Pluto, and it's very deep. Pluto's a very evocative archetype, so that's the lowest tier at 25. So it's really accessible. But I'm also offering astrology readings and discounted tuition to 2 of my courses that are coming up that I'll share more about in a moment here. So if you enjoy this, the work that I put out, and you'd like to contribute, you can consider me like public radio. I self-publish, so your support is immensely helpful, and I'm so appreciative. As you can see, we reached our goal. Kickstarter is an all or nothing platform. So you set a certain goal, and if you make it, then the project is funded. So the project is definitely going to be funded. Thank you so much. And I have a goal of having 200 backers. So we're at 42 at the time of me recording this. Maybe by the time you watch this, it's already raised. But go ahead and check out this Kickstarter page. I'm going to leave the link in the notes. So for one of the courses, this one is Online Presence as Performance Art. And this is about creating your online presence and having a more magical and fun relationship with the internet. A lot of us have inherited these really kind of diminishing narratives about the internet as it being this kind of soul-sucking place, and that we also have these anxieties and fears about putting ourselves out there. So this course is both to help you cultivate like a more fun and magical relationship with the being that is the internet, and how to cultivate an audience relationship, as well as how to overcome some of your hangups around being online, because I promise everyone has them. The whole thing about being in the public, in like astrology, for example, you have the Cancer Capricorn opposition, which is kind of our thing for the week, but Capricorn is like your public self and Cancer is your home life self. So the roles that we play in the public are accompanied by an emotional home that we have within ourselves. So I see it as kind of a personality development process, that when we want to do something, when we want to achieve something, we have to feel our way into that as well. So I'm going to be teaching that in this course. And then I'm also teaching an Evolutionary Astrology Intensive. This will be the 6th run of the course coming up, and this gives you the foundations to understanding evolutionary astrology, which is a karmic, soul-based, Pluto-based astrology that I'm super passionate about. And this course has some really glowing feedback from alumni. So I'm also going to leave the link to this in the notes, and you can check out and learn more about this course. And then last announcement, Magic of the Spheres podcast, new episode. This was with Nate Spear, and we talked about performance, magic, and charisma. And this was just such an interesting conversation. And I reached out to Nate because his astrology updates are like transmissions, and he has this theatrical way with movement and sound of describing the planetary motions. So I wanted to find out more about where he learned that, and we got into some conversation around what charisma is. And I've been thinking about that ever since. So go check out this episode where you listen to podcasts. Okay, and here's our week. On July 1st, 2020, Mercury retrograde in 9 degrees Cancer will square Chiron in 9 degrees of Aries at 9:56 a.m. Pacific. This somewhat tense transit, so it's Mercury, which can relate to our mind and our nervous system, and Chiron, which is a planet of, or it's an asteroid that relates to wounds and pain points. So it's also an asteroid related to initiations and spiritual initiations, and how the wounds that we have can be portals into greater spiritual awakening. So it is a pretty, it has an edge, this archetype. So Mercury square Chiron, there can be a tense quality to it. And this can correlate with some inner confrontations of emotional states that we find uncomfortable. And then this inner call to action that emerges within our distress. The call to action could be a coping strategy that assuages the problem, or taking action to remove oneself from the situation that is an ongoing cause of distress. So we're already in this week that has this kind of self-parenting dynamic, being present with the kicking and screaming side within us. And there can be many moments throughout the day that we just feel activated or uncomfortable. And there can be some healing that comes through being with ourselves and being compassionate towards ourselves when we're going through something, instead of just trying to kind of like usher ourselves along and sweep our discomfort under the rug. So inflammation may be a useful image to consider here. There is the issue itself, whatever is causing us distress, and then the puffy, tender energy around it. When we are encountering a problem or a difficult mental state, there is both the issue itself and our response to the issue or the inflammation that we must tend to. So the issue and the inflammation are different. And sometimes, we're just experiencing both at the same time. So it may be a moment to kind of parcel the two out from each other. As an example, if we are finding ourselves afraid of something, there can be the pragmatic response to the fear at the most basic level, and the emotional tending to the psychological inflammation around the fear, and they are different. So keep this in mind if you're having some kind of like hot emotional thought process moments of how is this an opportunity to heal, even though it's uncomfortable in its onset. And then Saturn will re-enter Capricorn. So Saturn's retrograde, it re-enters Capricorn at 10:33 p.m. Pacific. And Saturn's going to station direct on September 28th of this year and re-enter Aquarius on December 16th, 2020. So for most of the rest of the year, Saturn will be in Capricorn. So Saturn is drawing closer to Pluto in Capricorn. They formed a conjunction last January 12th, 2020. But we've still very much been in that zeitgeist. Saturn got a little bit of distance from Pluto, but it's still kind of been a Saturn-Pluto moment. And in the legendary text, Cosmos and Psyche by Rick Tarnas, Tarnas details major planetary alignments through history and their accompanying trends. For the Saturn-Pluto moments, which we're in now, he writes, and note for what I'm about to say that quadrature alignments just means conjunctions, oppositions, and squares. So here's the quote. While the Uranus-Pluto periods consistently coincided with widespread revolutionary upheaval, intensified emancipatory impulses, and radical cultural innovation, the successive quadrature alignments of the Saturn-Pluto cycle coincided with especially challenging historical periods, marked by a pervasive quality of intense contraction, eras of international crisis and conflict, empowerment of reactionary forces and totalitarian impulses, organized violence and oppression, all sometimes marked by lasting traumatic effects. An atmosphere of gravity and tension tended to accompany these 3 to 4 year periods, as did a widespread sense of epochal closure, the end of an era, the end of innocence, the destruction of an earlier mode of life that in retrospect may seem to have been marked by widespread indulgence, decadence, naivete, denial, and inflation. Profound transformation was a dominant theme, as with the Uranus-Pluto cycle. But here the transformation was through contraction, conservative reaction, crisis, and termination. So we don't need the astrological reflection to sense the profound levels of grief and heaviness in the air in the collective, but the astrological mirror is definitely there. So what's the use of knowing? The Saturn-Pluto dynamic has a variety of ways that it can manifest, and also some particular endeavors that it supports. In this context of collective grief or global contraction, there are aspects of moral transformation, discovering deep inner reserves when it feels that hope is lost, intensely tenacious work ethic, so putting one's head down and doing the work, starting and then not stopping until it's done, and transformations around individuals' relationship with authority. I think that's a big one. Inner authority, feeling like we have the right to exist, feeling like whatever we have that is our purpose or our gift, really stepping into that. In a Saturn-Pluto panel put on by Achyuta Bhava, and I'll leave the link, Lisa Scheim pointed out charts of environmental activists with natal Saturn-Pluto aspects. And these activists, year after year, would take on these mega giant corporations and government structures in the fight against environmental destruction. She pointed out that these activists had this steely tenacity. I never forgot that phrase, steely tenacity, in the face of their formidable opponents. This transit is not an experience why we can't be happy or experience joy in our lives. So I know it's heavy, Saturn, Pluto. In the best of times, there is sadness, and in the worst of times, there's also happiness. Life is very complex. Life isn't just parceled clear and cut. But we might consider that there is a snowed-in energy to this transit, that there is a contracted energy at play. So snowed in is a metaphor that I started to work with when it comes to being depressed. Because for me, I have many tools for getting out of depression. And sometimes there's just those times where it's more work to get out of those states. Or it happened a lot when I was younger, where I just was kind of convinced like things aren't going to be good for like a year or something, or things are just bad right now. So I'm just going to read some books and practice my writing until things get better. So what do you do when you're snowed in and stuck at home? And there's that energy of when things are contracted, what are you going to do with that space to be with the contraction? When things are expansive, we have new experiences, we travel, we meet new people, and those things could still be happening. Maybe not as much the travel, maybe. But what about maybe working on our finances or going through, like possessions, like that are just kind of piling up in the garage or in the closet or something? Like, what do we do with the time when things are contracted and heavy? And we might find self-esteem in the process of handling difficult things in our life with grace. We can be proud of ourselves, or know that we did the best that we could. Developing self-esteem as we develop aspects of ourselves or our lives that we have not paid much attention to before. Or in some way stepping up to the challenges that life is presenting to us. And on July 4th, 2020, we have a full moon eclipse in 13 degrees of Capricorn at 9:44 p.m. Pacific. And this is considered an eclipse, but the sun and moon are 14 degrees away from the nodes. Normally we use about a degree of 10, or an orb of 10 degrees. So this eclipse isn't as potent as the last two, technically, but you never know with eclipses. They are pretty wild energetically and can relate to this sense of entrances and exits and accelerated change and a bendiness of time. So I'm not going to go ahead and say that this eclipse isn't as eclipsy, like we'll find out, we'll see. But the sun in Cancer will be conjunct Vesta, priestess goddess Vesta, to the degree. They're only 2 seconds of a degree apart, so they're so close. It's really beautiful. And then Mars and Chiron in Aries will square the full moon axis. So this is a quote that I was speaking of earlier about how responsibility can make life more beautiful. And this is from Bell Hooks from All About Love. I know no one who has embraced a love ethic whose life has not become more joyous and more fulfilling. The widespread assumption that ethical behavior takes the fun out of life is false. In actuality, living ethically ensures that relationships in our lives, including encounters with strangers, nurture our spiritual growth. Behaving unethically, with no thought to the consequences of our actions, is a bit like eating tons of junk food. While it may taste good, in the end, the body is never really adequately nourished and remains in a constant state of lack and longing. Our souls feel this lack when we act unethically, behaving in ways that diminish our spirits and dehumanize others. And that's Bell Hooks. So one possibility of this lunation is stepping into greater responsibility, Capricorn, because we care, Cancer. So I just chose this image because you have this eye that is crying and like cardinal water, the waterfall kind of energy is very Cancerian. And then these tears are turning into this like architectural structure, which is more Capricorn. So I liked that Cancer Capricorn combined imagery. But during this lunation and leading up to it, this possibility of stepping into greater responsibility because we simply care. Cancer and Capricorn, I think, are both very deeply caring archetypes. They both want to provide, and in somewhat different ways. Cancer is this very kind of tender, embracing, kind of gushy archetype. And Capricorn's a little bit colder and more removed, but like structurally organizes things. And this isn't necessarily how people who are Cancer or Capricorn are going to act, but just speaking of the qualities of the archetype itself. But setting proper boundaries is a form, can be a form of care in our lives, which is a Capricorn thing. So in the book Mastery, Robert Greene writes about the fear that some people have about leaving a mark or having a legacy of any kind. How some people keep themselves small because they don't want to accidentally hurt anyone with their power. And he basically calls this out. Wouldn't it be good for conscientious people to rise up and participate in the creation of culture? So if we care, if we're noticing that there's something missing in the world, how might we rise to the occasion? And of course, this can be if we really have the space for it. Sometimes in life, we're just treading water or we're in survival mode. And so it can be a matter of like really feeling into when we have the space, when we have something to give. It can be easy to kind of be in this state of always wanting more, always wanting to receive. But I think one of the lessons of Capricorn is like assessing what's missing from the world right now, what's not going well, and how can I help participate. I think of like a ship with holes in it and it's kind of sinking, and Capricorn's the energy that wants to plug up those holes so that the ship doesn't keep sinking. And often this behavior can kind of go on in the background. Sometimes people that are acting really responsibly and providing a lot, they can go unnoticed. Not all the time, but they can. So sometimes they go unnoticed because it takes one to know one. Like sometimes if you're doing something, how would I describe this? So as an example, for me as a teacher now, I teach courses. I see what teachers that I study with are doing in a different way than when I was only a student and not also a teacher. And there's certain little things that I appreciate about teachers now because I understand some of what it takes to be a teacher. And so I can acknowledge it. Whereas before then, I just didn't see it. So often people that are like doing the space holding or they're providing something, just appreciating can be like a big heart opener for someone who's running a lot of Capricorn energy when they feel appreciated. This image is called, it's like architecture and nostalgia, which is so perfect for Cancer Capricorn. So that's why I put it there, mostly for the title. But until we own our inner authority, we're not really authoring our lives in the way that we could be. So authority is this capacity to know who you are and to embody it, to carry yourself with a certain level of command, to be effectual. And it's not to say that we can't delegate certain things. Sometimes, for example, we might hire someone to do something that isn't our specialty, but it's something that they are specifically doing, or it's their specialty. But when we're not taking responsibility for certain things in our lives, we are potentially just either neglecting it or delegating it and making someone else take care of it. And that may not be proper for us. Or perhaps it's not even a conscious choice. So developing our maturity, our authority, our deeper ethical standards, our adulting, like all of these Capricorn things, are a way of taking more responsibility for some of the things that we have just been kind of tossing to the side. And it's a dance both ways, because sometimes we take on responsibilities that aren't for us either. Like we're picking up slack where we really don't want to be. And there's the process of withholding that comes through with Capricorn, or stepping back, having boundaries. So it's really a balance. We may consider the value of living ethically, or living in a way that facilitates greater love and care in the world. Perhaps we are learning how to be more honest or more trustworthy, or how to be more reliable with our word. So being reliable with our word means that when we say something, we actually follow through with it. So before that, like let's say we aren't reliable with our word, we can just kind of say whatever, and we have no intention of following through with it unless we feel like it. And then when we say what we do and do what we say, then essentially when we make a promise, we are constraining our lives to fit that particular promise. So it doesn't feel like freedom. And yet the consequences of building a life of being ethical and of being honest cultivate and grow a different kind of life than if we're just wanting to do whatever we feel like, or like Bell Hooks was saying, eat junk food, but then feel this lack and longing because of it. So Capricorn has that energy of make the sacrifice or go without or delay gratification for a greater reward. And eventually too, if you're just in the habit of living ethically or keeping your word, it feels good in the time too. It just feels healthy. Another point. Are you someone who is always taking care of others and putting other people, like your family, your team, etc., before you? You may benefit from asking for help or learning how to ask if that's something you struggle with. I really like the book, The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer, for that purpose of learning what it means to ask for help. And there may be a burgeoning desire to be of more help at this time, with the moon growing full in Capricorn, like this emotional, like, I just want to provide, I want to be caring. So consider what's easy for you to give. So just because it's easy for you doesn't mean that it's not valuable. We don't need to like squeeze every drop out of ourselves to be worthy. We don't have to like drive ourselves into the ground to be worthy. Sometimes there's moments of pressure in life where like some process that we're in is really cooking, and like we're really giving it our all and like really going hard. And that might be in the field right now too. But also, sometimes I think with Capricorn, there's a good reminder, things don't always have to be hard. We're just used to thinking that if it's hard, it's worth more. So we often underestimate the things that come naturally to us because we don't feel like we earned them. We're just kind of born with them, or there are these natural affinities. But it can actually be really sustainable. And you can do this through studying astrology or getting an astrology reading. I can help you with it if you want to consult with me, of like, where are the natural strengths and affinities in yourself, in your chart? And yes, they don't feel like a big deal to you because they're easy for you. But this may be something that you have really abundantly to offer. And this can be your sacred offering to community that is sustainable. I'm really big on this one right now because I've been learning about it in my own work, because I always am a little bit of a perfectionist and I want to do a good job. And I've realized that there are certain things I have to offer and give that aren't that hard for me, but are still valuable. And it took me some time to learn that. And so I want to pass that on because it's just nice for everything to not have to be so hard. And I think that's what a lot of us are learning when it comes to studying spirituality. I'm going to stop the share here. Or like getting in alignment, that it's about being on the path of least resistance and living a life of ease. And that's great. That is part of our experience. And sometimes with Capricorn specifically, it is about doing the hard thing. So I know it's a little bit of both messages here. It's really balance of finding a reserve of like what's the right and potentially the harder thing for you to do, and deepening your character through that kind of struggle. And also knowing when it's time to just relax and realize like, hey, you've either were born with something that is easy for you, or you've already cultivated a talent and you can just easily share that. Okay, I think that was a lot of words. I'm gonna stop there. But thank you so much for meditating on the planets with me this week. If you'd like further guidance, I do offer individual natal chart readings. And I also have been increasingly focused on longer one-to-one mentorship, longer term, helping people understand their natal charts over time and through experience, and also working with people towards their goals, especially about things like online presence or cultivating your career path, using your astrology chart as a resource in that. So I love doing this. If you want to work with me in this capacity, get to know your natal chart over time and work towards specific goals with me, you can reach out to me, write me an email at sabrina@monarchastrology.com and set up a free consultation with me for that. Find me on Instagram at Sabrina Monarch, on Twitter at Sabrina_Monarch. Do check out my Kickstarter. I have lots of things to share with you through there. And I also have a mailing list you can join. I'll leave that link, and you'll get an article about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which was written before it happened, the exact one, and many of its themes are what we're still just going through. But that's an in-depth article about that. And you'll also get all the updates about course offerings and the forecast delivered directly to you. And lastly, if you haven't yet, please like this video and leave me a comment. Let me know what resonated with you, and I'll catch you next time.